next very special guest, Miss Judy Priest. And our next very special guest, Mr. Darryl Warby. Now, all three of our guests have had an involvement in Anderson Productions and in puppetry for many years, right back from the late 1950s. Mary's going to hit me if I've gone too far back in time. That's about right, isn't it? Right through to the present day. So what we're going to do is we'll talk briefly to all of our guests about their involvement, and then we're going to swap some stories and talk about some friends and their involvement in the programmes as well. Hopefully you'll enjoy it, and at the end we do have, where is she? Another special guest. Is she hiding somewhere? That might be coming out at the end. Mary has bought her original Lady Penelope puppet. So if we leave time at the end, we might have time to have a look at that too. I'm sure everybody wants to do that. So without further ado, starting, I was going to say from left to right because I'm backwards now. It's actually from, yeah, it's from left to right, isn't it? From left to right, Mary Turner. It's lovely to have you here today, Mary.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure your name will be familiar to everybody in the room, but could you tell us how you started working for Jerry and Sylvia Anderson and when that was, please?
I started working for Jerry and Sylvia Anderson in the late 1950s, 57 or 58, on Twizzle. I wasn't on Twizzle, I was on Torchy.
And how did you come to be involved in that?
Well, I knew Christine Glanville from way back because we used to belong to the Puppet Guild. And,
which still goes to this day. Is anyone here a member of the British Puppet Guild? I'm sure there's a few people here.
And Christine had already worked on Twizzle, and they were looking for more puppeteers when it came to Torchy. And she asked me to go for an interview with, it was Jerry and Arthur Probus at that time. And so I went to this, what looked like a mansion in Finsbury Park, somewhere like that.
Violet Park?
No, this was at Roberta Lee's house.
Oh, I've heard about Roberta Lee's house. Do you want to tell us about Roberta Lee's house, Mary? It's called Chelsea, isn't it?
It's quite ornate.
Yes.
And I had to bring one of my own puppets, and also there were a couple of other puppeteers, but luckily I got the job.
Can you tell us about Roberta Lee? What do you remember about Roberta Lee?
Well, she of course wrote the scripts for Torchy and the songs, she used to come down to the studio in Islet Park every now and again with her chauffeur-driven car, of course. And we were working late one night, and she sent the chauffeur out to get us something to eat. And we didn't know what she'd asked him to get, excuse me. And he came back with a couple of bars of chocolate, and that was distributed amongst us. That was our evening food. Thank you.
And so then you worked on Torchy and Twizzle, and then your involvement in the production.
Not Twizzle, no.
Oh, sorry.
No, Torchy.
And then, so from Torchy you went to Four Feather Falls.
Four Feather Falls, yes. And then, of course, we moved to Slough. After we'd done the pilot, we did move to Slough for Four Feather Falls.
Only 10 minutes from where we are now.
Probably, yes.
And your involvement in those productions sort of grew and grew, didn't it? So, what was your, how did your role grow up? Because I'm sure everyone in the room knows already, but Mary worked on all of those Super Mario Nation puppet shows through to Secret Service, didn't you? And
yes,
by Stingray and Thunderbirds, you were pivotal to the puppet team. What did your role grow into?
Well, from working the puppets on the bridge, I was a puppet supervisor, and I had to coordinate all the puppets which stage they were on and make sure they were ready in time. I still worked on the bridge at times when there were crowd shots.
Sure.
But that happened because the film for cinema was being made as well, so it was quite involved, really.
And you also created a lot of the key characters, didn't you? You were sculpting puppets.
From Four Feather Falls, yes.
Can you remember some of the ones that you sculpted that are all
Four Feather Falls, the horse.
How was the horse made?
Gosh,
Was it wood or was it?
I think the limbs were wood. I think it was all wood. Well, except for the head. The head had to be hollow, of course, because the horse actually talked.
So you were,
at
that stage, you were still into very quite traditional puppetry and puppet sculpting things, weren't you? Sculpting the horse, and then by the end of the production, you sculpted Stanley Unwin, I think, for Secret Service, didn't you? And that's a huge leap in what you were doing. I wasn't saying skills; it's a different kind of thing, but it's a huge change in style, isn't it? That you must have done over that 10-year period.
Yeah.
So how did that all develop? You went on. Because the one that always made... Did you sculpt Mike Mercury?
Yes.
Is he one of yours?
Mike Mercury, yes.
Steve Zodiac?
Steve Zodiac.
Troy Tempest?
Troy Tempest and Marina.
Who else?
Well, then it's into Thunderbirds. I can't remember who else I did on Stingray.
I know you did Lady Penelope, which is probably your most famous creation, isn't it?
Lady Penelope, yes, I suppose so.
And then through on to Scarlet, Captain Scarlet himself. Which characters on Joe, do you remember?
The Professor.
Professor
Professor in it, yeah.
We've got him. If anyone wants to look at him, we've got an original one of that upstairs.
Mm.
And then Father Unwin, the Secret Service. So if you think of all those programmes we love, think about how many faces and how many characters that we look at, and they were all made by you, weren't they?
Yes, yeah.
Tell us about Lady Penelope. How did Lady Penelope come to be?
Well, the first thing was we were told what we had to model. I think we had a script, or anyway, a description of the characters, and so we got to work and modelled what we were told to do. And I didn't base her on anyone at that point. And then Sylvia would come round and look at them and say she wanted this and that altered. And this went on for quite a while, but eventually at the end she looked like Sylvia.
And then did Sylvia like her when she? And
Sylvia liked her then. But until that point, she kept making differences. Things needed to be different on her until eventually it looked like her.
So how did that
quite unintentional, I think, in Sylvia's mind.
That creative process, was that kind of typical how it worked? You would be working with clay, would you sculpt in there?
No, there was plasticine by that time. We were working with clay earlier on because we were using a rubber called Vinamold, which was a stinking sort of stuff that you had to heat up. And plasticine wouldn't have been any good because it was hot stuff.
Right.
So we had clay on the beginning ones. Four Feather Falls was definitely clay. I'm not quite sure when we turned to plasticine, but it was when we were able to get the rubber, the cold cast rubber.
Cold cure.
Cold cure rubber, yeah.
And so you would be sculpting in plasticine, and you would be taking. Did you take every head that you sculpted to Sylvia for approval? Is that how the process worked, or was it just the main characters? And you did some individual?
Well, I was only doing the main characters, so I'm not sure.
Right, and Sylvia looked at all those, and there was a sort of backwards and forwards approval process going on.
Yes, yeah.
And what about some of the other left field characters like Parker? What do you remember about? That was created by John, wasn't it?
John Blundell created Parker, yes.
And what do you remember about that? Because the reason the series works so well, in my opinion, is the contrast between some of the images. When you see a lot of things that are done now, the characters all look so samey, don't they? If you look at a lot of children's programs that are done now with CGI and puppets, whereas I think one of the things that really works in Thunderbirds is that different people's styles were allowed to not be suppressed. That's the best way of putting it. And you look at Lady Penelope and Parker, and they do look like they came from different worlds, and that works artistically. What do you remember about? Do you remember anything about that? What was your reaction when you saw Parker? Did you think, what's that? Or did you think?
No, I thought it was very good. It was a good, more of a caricature than any of the other puppets in the series, but somehow he worked.
He did.
It was very good.
And then suddenly you were told to completely change style and go for human proportion puppets.
Yes.
For Captain Scarlet. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, we had to change the style of the puppets because apparently Jerry didn't realise up to then that they weren't actually human proportions. They'd done Thunderbirds and the book ones previously. And so he wanted them to be human proportions.
And what challenges did that present you?
Sorry?
What challenges did that present for you guys in the puppet workshop?
Well, there was, of course, the heads were about this size, and the solenoid couldn't be put actually in the head, and the modelling on them had to be much finer, and the finish much finer as well, because although it was because it was smaller, on the screen it would appear as big as the Thunderbirds heads had done. So it was magnified.
Wasn't there also a bit of an issue with getting them to walk? Because you don't see much walking in Captain.
Walking fizzled out, didn't it?
Yeah, that started way back in
Yeah.
probably after Four Feather Falls even.
I think one of the things
when
people come into the model room and they see the puppets here, a lot of people still say those can't be originals because their heads are so small.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testimony to the skill that went into doing them. No one can believe it's actually, before I saw original puppets, I thought the heads must be, when you had a TV 21 annual as a kid or something like that, you would never believe that what you were looking at was only something barely twice the size of an Action Man head or something like that.
I think also, I'd like to say, it's testament to puppeteers like Mary that it's much harder to operate a small head like that. You've got to do really, really small movements, otherwise everything looks overly exaggerated. So it's actually, in some ways, much harder to work on that scale and make it look realistic.
You had some assistance in that, because the system was developed with where you could see the puppets' movements by television while you were on the gantry. Do you remember when that came in, where you had the TV monitor? Because Jerry developed that, didn't it? And that then went on to be used by...
And John Reed.
And John Reed.
Yeah. When did that start? We didn't have it on Twizzle or anything. On Torchy, I mean. I can't remember exactly when it started.
But that
when we went to
certainly would have given you a big advantage in being able to see what the camera was seeing rather than looking away from it.
Looking down on the top of the head, it was difficult to tell which way they were looking. So the monitor was a great innovation.
So Mary created all these beautiful characters that we all love and we still look at pictures of and buy models of and everything, but you didn't stop there, did you? You went on to do lots of other things as well. You formed a company called Cinemation. When Century 21 Studios stopped doing puppet series in 1969, the Secret Service, yourself, John Reed, and some other people who worked on it. Who else was involved from the industry show?
Well, John and I formed a partnership, and then we had help from, Christine came to work on Rupert, and I think she was the only one from Century 21. And we made Rupert Bear for young children.
Who remembers Rupert Bear? Who loved Rupert Bear? So what happened when you went from Century to one? You set up Cinemation with John, and you started doing Rupert. You got commissioned to do Rupert by ITV, was it? Or
we got commissioned by ITV, yes.
And pretty much straight in, almost like it was almost like the next series, wasn't it?
Well, there was a bit of time in between where we were doing different bits of work. We did a couple of commercials. One thing we had, excuse me, one thing we were the first to do was to create an advert that had an X rating on the cinema.
With puppets?
Not with puppets, no. It was a,
Sorry.
It was quite a simple thing that we did, because there was a magazine called Cinema X around at that time, and it was mostly talking about what were then semi-pornographic films, I suppose, at that time. They wouldn't be so now. We just had to photograph pictures in the actual book, the magazine, and that's all we had to do, and it went out on the cinema, and was rated X. So we were the first to have an X-rated advert on cinema.
YouTube.
And so, and then you did several series of Rupert, didn't you?
We did 3 lots of 52 films of Rupert.
And it was massively successful.
Well, we did the first series of 52, and we worked under ITC, which was an ATV company, and they said, "Oh, thank you very much, we can show this to different generations of people." So there was no work for us. So we stored all the stuff anyway, we didn't get rid of it, luckily, because not long afterwards they came back and said, "Well, we want another series now," because apparently they'd sold well abroad. So they were happy to do another series, and then another one after that.
Fantastic. And then what did Cinemation do after Rupert?
After we did Rupert, we did a series called Here Comes Mumphy, which was about a little elephant it was from a book.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
That was from a book, the publishers, Murray's, I think they were called. We made the characters, and then they sent 2 little old ladies, at least I thought they were old then, to come and look at the puppets, because I think they were very doubtful about what it was going to look like. But anyway, they were very pleased with the characters. So we made 52 10-minute ones of those.
And then?
Then after that, we were trying to do our own series, one that we'd thought up, but it's very difficult to get your own things on. And eventually they let us do it, and it was called Clopper Castle.
Who remembers Copper Castle?
Yeah.
Some? I remember Copper Castle, it was beautiful. So that was your own career. That was the first time that you and John really...
It was the only time we were able to get our own one on, yes. After that, someone had come to them with this series, this book. I'm trying to think of the name of it. What was the last one we did? The Munch Bunch. Yeah. So we had to go back to doing the one from the book called the Munch Bunch, which was, of course, all fruit characters. And that was the last one that we did, because the franchises were changing, and new people were coming in, and the Muppets had started up by that time, and that sort of puppet had taken over more than the marionettes.
But
So that was the last one we did.
Your influence on childhood went from the late 50s to Munch Bunch was about 1980, 81, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So
81 or 2, I think it finished.
25 years of kids grew up loving what you were creating. I think that deserves a round of applause.
That's, I have to say, I was one of those children.
And moving seamlessly on as if
I thought I'd give you that. So I
Judy,
watched...
you were one of a generation of people who grew up loving the work of Mary and Christine and their colleagues, and then decided to do that yourself.
That's absolutely right, and I was very keen on Thunderbirds. And I thought Lady Penelope was so glamorous, and I liked Marina. We've got a look-alike here today, and it's just quite interesting because she doesn't really speak, does she? And I love talking, so it's, and she was one of my heroines.
She spoke once.
Oh, did she?
In a dream sequence.
Oh yes, she did. She did. Yeah, that's right. So I remember watching all of that, and I then ended up at Norwich Puppet Theatre, and I met Jan King. Do you remember Jan King?
Yeah.
And he was
Jan King was on the Century 21 stuff, wasn't he? From Scarlet through to Secret Service, something like that.
I can't remember when he started.
Towards the end.
Yeah.
So Jerry at this time was thinking, as you were saying, he was thinking of moving direction in terms of puppetry manipulation, and he was looking for people to work on his series Terrorhawks. And I was incredibly lucky because Jan introduced me, and I met Christine, and I have to say I have to thank Jerry and Christine for giving me that opportunity. That was the first chance I had to work in film and television, and I worked for many years after that in film and television. So I've always been grateful to Jerry for giving me that chance, and also for Christine for teaching me so much about puppetry. And we had a great time. It was a much smaller operation. There was 2 stages, a special effects stage and a puppet stage, and we worked quite closely with the special effects guys. In fact, we've got John Lee, one of the model makers, coming in later on today. And we had it was really, really good fun. And I was mainly on the floor, working as the floor puppeteer, so I was making sure the puppets looked gorgeous. And as you know, this was a different style of puppetry, so instead of being on the bridge, we were underneath with all the spaceships and models above our heads, and the special effects boys would come over, and they were kind of, a lot of them were new to the art form of film, and I'm quite relieved Stephen Begg's not here today, because I think it's safe to say it was a bit of trial and error going on with some of those explosions. Absolutely. And we'd be underneath operating these puppets, and they'd sort of be a massive flash and a bang, and anyway, it was good. And of course there was the Zeroids. I had a lot to do with operating the Zeroids.
And they were operated from underneath as well, weren't they?
Well, they had rods going up underneath them, and then they had hundreds of different electrical controls. So they had the controls for the 3 lip parts. They had different mouth patterns for each character. So Sergeant Major had a different mouth pattern in terms of the lights than what was the other one called? Hero, I think. Anyway, 101 had a different sort of ripply mouth pattern, and then you had different controls, remote controls for the eye movements and the eyelids, and there was a strange mixture of sort of relatively high technology at the time and extremely low tech stuff, because of course we had to work out how to get these things to move. So what would happen would we be operating all of this with all these electrical cables going up inside that sort of sleeve bit that they sat on. But then in order to get them to move, we'd exchange this bit of heavy metal machinery with a light football spray painted to look exactly the same. And then we'd we get a high power hose there and aim like this, and literally the ball would bounce to where it wanted to be. And of course it was always a bit random, so actually what we used to do is then we'd have to reverse the footage, so that if you wanted him to jump back onto the perch, then you just reverse the film the other way around. So, a lot of people wonder how that worked, and so that was my first involvement with Jones and working on that. But then after that I did do a few commercials, and I moved on from that doing other sorts of puppetry. I worked on something called Grim Tales with Rick Mail. Did anyone ever see that? It was his storytelling. He was in an animated chair. I was the animated chair, and that had lots of other puppetry mixed in with it. And I did a character called Snoot the Seal for Sky Television when Sky was just starting off, and everyone said this is never going to work, satellite television is ridiculous, and I actually worked for 5 years as a main character on that. And then I kind of moved, I did a lot of shows with puppetry, but then I moved I got interested in writing and in researching for children's television, and I think it was partly because all the stuff I'd been interested in was all sort of science fiction, and I was interested in science. And someone asked me, would I be interested in coming along and writing the Hows for How To, which was a science-based programme. So this was a completely different challenge. This was with, anyone remember How To?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so this was with Carol Vorderman and Fred Dinage, who'd been the young one when I was a kid. He was the older one. And then there was Gaz Top in there too. So I sort of moved in slightly into that direction and ended up on a Saturday morning show where I met Daryl. And Daryl was a puppet maker, and well, we worked together on, all three of us actually worked on the Calling Elvis. Do you remember Calling Elvis, the Dire Straits? It's on YouTube. So
you all worked with Jerry Anderson on one project at the same time, which was, remember the Calling Elvis video for the, and everyone saw it. So what was your three involvements in that project?
Well, I was operating puppets.
Yeah.
You were.
Yeah, with you.
Yeah.
I must have been as well, but I can't remember doing that at all.
You sculpted some of the characters, did you?
The band.
Did you sculpt the band, the Dire Straits band?
Well,
Yes, I did.
yes, that's right.
Which one did I do? I can't remember that.
And Christine was involved?
Christine was
Yeah.
Who else
involved.
was involved? Christine Glanville.
Christine.
David
Yeah.
Ross.
David, was Tina there?
Don't remember Tina. Ian Denny was puppeteering. David Ross.
David Ross was there.
Glenn, I think Glenn Holden for a time.
Yeah.
We spent about a week in a roof, didn't we?
Yes.
Working puppets through kind of holes. It was this, they used the studio, it was a lighting studio, and everything was quarter scale, and it was under an arch somewhere in
Battersea.
Battersea.
I didn't know that, but every time I've ever done it, it's under an arch in Battersea.
And it
So
was, so the whole studio was used as a lighting rig plot. So it was ideal for the quarter scale puppets. And of course Barry made all of the puppets too for that.
Daryl, I haven't introduced you properly.
Sorry.
We merged seamlessly on this planet again, didn't we? So, are you another of the generation of us who grew up loving the Century 21 stuff, and were you or did you get influenced into puppetry another way? How did all this
Actually
start?
through Thunderbirds.
Through Thunderbirds.
Probably mid-70s, and it was probably the third rerun. I
I'd have thought it was the early 90s reruns that got you into it.
No. But bless you. We didn't get a colour TV until probably about the Royal Wedding, and it was at 81, 80. So I just remember watching kind of these images on the screen of, I couldn't quite make out whether these were real people or what they were, but it got me really hooked. And my puppetry career started as a rather obsessive hobby, I guess. And over a period of time I got to know Mary and Judith and got involved in the British Puppet Model Theatre Guild.
Yeah.
And I was due to go to art school at some point and do, everybody said get a proper job, including my father who was an engineer. And funny enough, we went to a guild meeting, and Mary and John Reed were there, and they were doing a demonstration and talking about Glover Castle. And my dad got to see all of Mary and John's work, and it was from that night, actually, thanks to Mary and John being there, that my dad actually got it. Being an engineer, he actually got to see the mechanisms inside of the puppets and actually saw something that he could relate to. So after that kind of evening, really, he just let me go and kind of do my thing.
Well, I think your father asked John and I if you would make a puppeteer, and we said yes. So that must have been
With that kind of seal of approval, there was no argument. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people who have pivotal roles in these programs who sadly are no longer with us. We've mentioned John Reed. I never met John, but I always get the impression that the engineering stuff, the technical stuff, he was an absolute genius at. Would that be a fair summary of what kind of stuff did John do? Do you remember some? I know he did like the electronics in the puppet heads and what else was he?
And Reg Hill worked a lot on the mechanisms in the head, but he also he was a cameraman, and he did a lot of the innovations to do with looking through the lens and seeing a screen, which, I mean, it's old hat now, but at that time it was quite a new invention.
And we're still
had a lot
using
to do
these
with
techniques today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I wanted to, a lady we've mentioned several times, Christine Glanville. Everyone knows that name. And I think you all individually and at the same time have worked with Christine. What are your memories of Christine?
Well, I first remember her at the Puppet Guild, which we all belonged to prior to the Gerry Anderson films. And she was doing cabaret puppets, which are puppets about this height from the ground. And the puppeteer is seen, not behind a screen or anything. That was her job then, working in cabarets.
She had a great pair of legs, by the way.
Yeah, she wore black tights and a silvery sort of jacket, as I remember her.
I think the thing about Christine is she was absolutely committed to puppetry, but she was also, in terms of a person, she was always really good fun to work with, and always smiling and always looking for a solution to a problem and never being defeated by anything.
Christine was on Terrorhawks with you.
She was, yeah, and she, you know, all sorts of little, when we were in the early stage of her, all sorts of little problems arose, things like, of course, Kate Kestrel had to have these different coloured wigs, you know, she appears with different coloured hair, and so of course all the wigs kept coming in human sizes, and so they were always slipping. So I remember I was sort of painstakingly taking them apart and taking little sections out. And then there was also another issue with the budgeting, because of course Gerry wanted the puppets to look as human as possible, and so he decided that we would have human glass eyes, and so we decided on all the different colours and everything, and then the budget came in double for the glass eyes, because of course most people only want one glass eye. And so we thought we were ordering them in pairs, but no. And she would always sort of think of ways of getting things to sort of look, you know, with the monsters in Terrorhawks more horrific. And I remember thinking, oh, we've got to make this shroud really drool. And she was going, well, let me have a think about what would make a good
drool.
And then drool like this. Yeah, she said, I know what we'll use. KY jelly and Swafiga mixed. So I remember her with great affection and absolute dedication to the art of puppetry.
And sadly, another lady who had a big influence passed away recently, Judith Shot. And Judy had a great influence on all these programs, didn't she? Can we
yes,
be able
she was a very good manipulator. And also, when we were making the heads prior to the filming, she was my assistant, helping to make all of the surfaces smooth and just working on them with me. And
then, Daryl, you knew Judith very well, didn't you? She had a big influence on you.
She was like my big sister. Sadly, actually, we did get a chance to work together, but it was never puppeteering. But we worked on Stephen's documentary a couple of years ago. Three of us were in the same room together, and we spent the whole day, and it was brilliant. And we all did what we do, and that was magic.
I only ever met Judith once at the Cosford last year, if anybody went to that, and her energy and her wit were just hitting you in the face with her.
She loved it. She so enjoyed. I mean, Mary and Judith both had a great day. But she wanted to know where all of the women were at the convention. It was her first con. And she said to me, she said, I had the most absolutely amazing day. She said, but where? She said, but it's like, it's all full of very good looking middle-aged men.
But it could be worse.
She loved it. Yeah,
and
absolutely loved it.
And Mary and Judy, later on, you'll be doing some signings, and the money from those signings will be going to charity for multiple sclerosis in Judy's memory. So if we could ask everyone to try and support that, that would be really lovely. Thank you. And you get a priceless autograph and a chance to meet two very influential people for that as well. Now another lady will be making an appearance at that autograph sessions. Has been conspicuously lurking up the corner of the room, and we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm guessing everyone would love to see this original Lady Penelope puppet. Yeah. And if Mary would be so kind, she's going to bring her to life for us. Thank you, Mary. Can you just very quickly talk us through what you're doing to make her come to life?
What I'm doing.
Yeah, you've got different sets of strings for her, haven't you?
And head, eyes, but she doesn't walk.
Still.
Is that how the puppet would have been strung when you were filming? Is that the same string arrangement? Or would there
Yes.
be more strings than that, or would it just have been?
That was the usual.
So if you can,
Strings.
I don't know if you can see from there, but you've got 2 strings coming down the front here to the hands, and then 5 strings to the head, but there's no other string. So the whole weight of the puppet is being taken by the head, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, it's stiff. It's gone stiff again. Next time somehow.